The ayes have it. We now come to questions. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Richard Holden.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to answer this question together with questions 9, 17 and 19. When we entered office, debt was at highs not seen since the 1960s. My commitment to the fiscal rules is non-negotiable, and we will drive debt down to a sustainable level. There have been movements in global financial markets, and the UK is not immune to those. The Office of Budget Responsibility will produce a forecast in the usual way, and I will respond with a statement to Parliament on the 26th of March, but I will not be giving a running commentary on that forecast.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Labour came to office promising to kick-start growth. Instead, they've kicked it into the gutter, with us now seeing some of the slowest growth in the G7, in the actual figures rather than the projections over the last few months. Where is the money for the public sector and public services going to come from with zero economic growth?
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, a PwC report showed that the UK was the second most attractive place in the world to invest for global CEOs. It's the first time in 28 years that we've been in that position in the league tables, and the IMF forecast on Friday forecast that the UK will be the fastest major economy in Europe to grow next year.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Last time I raised the markets and concerns of debt with the Chancellor, she told me to, quote, get real. What the Chancellor really is real is the cost of that debt interest at over £10 billion. What is real is the three choices she has, either to increase taxes on people and businesses in the likes of Earl Shilton and Burbage and up and down the country, or to cut services for the people in Hinckley and Donisthorpe up and down the country, or to borrow on the country's credit card. So will she now be real with the public and tell which of the three it's going to be?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We inherited a high amount of debt from the previous government, and we have to pay interest costs on that debt. But the forecast that I set out in the budget in October shows that debt falling to a sustainable level. As I said, the OBR will produce a forecast that will be published on the 26th of March, and I will make a statement at that time.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor's increased demand for government borrowing drives up its price and crowds out investment by productive private enterprises, doesn't it?
Well, let me have a go, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for that question. There's undoubtedly been moves in global financial markets this year. The UK is not immune to those movements. The OBR haven't yet started their forecast. They will update that in due course, and I'll make a statement on the 26th of March.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since coming to office, the Chancellor has increased taxes by £40 billion, increased borrowing by £30 billion, and her Employment Rights Bill increased the costs of employers of a further £5 billion. Doesn't she accept that decisions she has taken has led to a loss of confidence in the British economy and an increase in our borrowing costs?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I don't think you can explain the borrowing costs in every major country in the world by decisions made by this government. As I said to the honourable member for Hinckley last week, I think you've just got to get real. The fact is there have been global movements in financial markets. That has affected the United Kingdom as well. But if you look at the PwC report from yesterday, the most recent report on market confidence, global CEOs see the UK, after the US, as being the second best place in the world to invest.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the IMF forecasting that the UK is set to be the fastest growing major economy in Europe, you would think that members opposite would welcome that. But I know that my right honourable friend will not be satisfied until residents in Bracknell and across the country feel the benefits of economic improvement in their pay packets and in their day-to-day lives. So will she set out what more she can do to make sure that we tackle the cost of living and fix the economic mess that we've inherited from members opposite?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it's absolutely right. After 14 years of stagnant growth and the last Parliament where living standards declined, that we turn around that performance, and that is what this government is determined to do. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill will come to Parliament shortly, and then the Pensions Bill to unlock long-term patient capital and make it easier for businesses to get things done in this country.
Shadow Minister Mark Garnier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor makes reference to the PwC report, half of which, of course, was the survey was done before the budget. So it's not entirely so the thing. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor and I spent a very happy 3 years sitting next to each other on the Treasury Select Committee. And the one thing she was incredibly good at was demanding she get straight answers from the witnesses that come in front of us. She's already been asked questions about the fact that the fiscal headroom is only £10 billion and the increase in the cost of borrowing is now going to go through the roof. So at some point she will have to raise taxes, cut investment or increase debt. Which is it going to be?
Well, first of all, on the issue of the headroom in our budget was larger than the headroom that we inherited from the previous government. So we put aside more money for changes in economic prospects. But the OBR have not yet done their forecast. They'll be taking into account a whole variety of factors, and they will make that forecast, and we will make decisions based on that. But as I've been really clear, our fiscal rules are non-negotiable because, unlike the party opposite, we are determined to meet the fiscal rules, not break them, time and time again.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rising cost of borrowing is also going to bring more misery to mortgage holders, with some reports suggesting that some mortgage holders could pay an extra £500 a year. Given that potential global trade tensions could further affect the UK's financial stability, what assurances can the government provide that UK lenders remain in a strong position to support households and small businesses?
I thank the honourable lady for that question. And of course, on this side of the House and amongst the Liberal Democrats, we're very mindful of the impact of the last government's impact on mortgage borrowing costs for so many of our constituents. And we're determined to tackle the cost of living crisis. I've also, as the honourable member knows, written to the financial regulators, including the FCA, about regulating for growth, not just for risk, so that we can help more people get on the housing ladder and help grow our economy.
Emily Darling.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government remains committed to restoring ODA spending to 0.7% of GNI as soon as fiscal circumstances allow. Latest OBR forecasts show that the ODA fiscal tests are not due to be met within this Parliament, but we will continue to monitor future forecasts closely, and each year we will review and confirm, in accordance with the International Development Act of 2015, whether a return to spending at 0.7% of GNI on ODA is possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. I'd like to thank him for protecting the level of ODA given the fiscal situation we inherited. But with more wars going on in the world than at any time since World War II, will he review the formula, the fiscal formula, which of course he and the Chancellor rightly voted against when put forward by the previous government, put ODA budget on a long-term settlement and meet with me to discuss how we can improve UK safety through the ODA budget?
I thank my honourable friend for her question on a topic I know that she has great expertise in. She will know that spending across departments, whether on military, humanitarian or economic support, is important to be aligned with our ODA spending. The multi-year spending review is underway and will confirm budgets in June for the years ahead. And as I've confirmed to the House, we will come back to the House every year to review and confirm the fiscal tests as they relate to 0.7% of GNI on ODA.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the OBR forecasts that the fiscal test for returning to the 0.7% will not be met in this Parliament, and there has been no equivalent uplift of the £2.5 billion that the Conservatives put to spend in-country refugee costs, is the Minister and this Labour government content to have presided over a real terms cut to their ODA budget compared to the previous Conservative government?
One of the issues, as I think the Honourable Lady alludes to, is under the last administration, when they lost control of the borders and the asylum system, the cost of hotels to house asylum seekers waiting for their decision was included in the ODA definition of spending. That's why the Home Secretary is working at pace to reduce that backlog as quickly as possible, where we are making much more significant progress than the previous administration did in many years.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. And just to follow on from that, members will be reminded of the fact that ODA costs spent in the UK are now at record levels thanks to the last government. This should not be the case. ODA should be being spent as much as possible in the poorest countries in the world. So may I ask the Minister what steps they are taking to help the Home Office bring down those costs so that more aid can be spent where it's truly needed?
I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. That's why dealing with the backlog, both in the Home Office for processing claims and processing returns, but also working with counterparts in the Ministry of Justice to ensure that the tribunal process is up to speed, is intrinsically important to the ODA budget. Under the last administration, crucial ODA for bilateral aid in countries around the world that were in desperate need of it were cut at short notice because of their mishandling of the asylum system. That will not happen under this government.
Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Treasury bench attached great importance to the international development budget, not least because I recall that the Chancellor of the Exchequer supported my efforts to stop the 0.7 being cut by my own government, even winding up the debate with great skill and flair. So will Treasury ministers therefore follow in the footsteps of the Chancellor's predecessor, the Right Honourable Member for Godalming, and top up the budget with an additional £2.5 billion so that the Foreign Office and the Government can achieve their own international development objectives?
I thank the Right Honourable gentleman, as I'm sure the Chancellor does, for his kind words. A key part of the sentence around the test on ODA spending in terms of fiscal circumstances, of course, requires the fiscal circumstances to improve. One of the reasons we're in this problem in the first place is because of the mess the previous administration left this country in. We're working hard to turn that around.
Helen Maguire.
Recent flooding in Leatherhead left footpaths near essential services like train stations overflooding with... Question 4.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK does need higher level...
Can I just say it was the number I needed? Just answer that and then we've got the second part. Doing two.
Too many parts of the country and too many families have felt the devastating effects of flooding in recent months, not least in South Wales and in the Honourable Member's constituency. The Government has committed £2.4 billion over the next 2 years to increase community flood resilience. Everyone in this House recognises that flooding is a challenge that will be with us for years to come and will set out further plans at the spending review.
Right. Go on, Bill Esterson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The vote of confidence by the PwC, the upgrading of the growth forecast by the IMF, and indeed the £63 billion announced at the Growth Summit are all indications of the successful plans of this government. Does my honourable friend agree that they are added to by the clear direction on green investment into energy projects, and that this will deliver success for our economy as well as contributing towards our climate targets?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I say, we take very seriously the need to protect communities from flooding and to deliver on our commitments on climate in the years ahead. And it's important that we do both in principles, and that is what the Environment Department and the Energy Department are doing.
Right, let us go to Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So recent flooding in Leatherhead left footpaths near essential services like train stations overflooding with sewage. In Leatherhead, there are no alternative options to divert water. Given the importance of long-term flood preparations, can the Chancellor commit to securing funding for flood defences beyond 2025-26? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for her question. She'll know that specific flood defence schemes will be considered in the normal way, and when it comes to funding beyond 25-26, those will be decisions on overall levels of funding that are taken in the spending review later this year.
Right. Let us move to Dr. Alison Garden.
6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Hang on, we've got Gareth Davis. We're in complete chaos. We've got the wrong names coming in. What's confused everybody? Question 3 was withdrawn. And that's what everybody's a question behind. Right, Gareth Davis, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, never in doubt. Never in doubt. Can I first of all welcome the Minister to his place? Mr. Speaker, the removal of investment allowances for our domestic oil and gas industry is strangling domestic supplies at a time when our storage levels are depleted. Labour's ideologically driven, unachievable obsession with decarbonising the grid by 2030 might be good news for Chinese renewables manufacturers, but it's bad news for British households. Isn't it the case that the only growth we're going to see from Labour's energy policy is in the amount people pay for their energy bills? Or can the Minister stand up now and commit, just as they all did during the general election campaign, and commit to cutting energy bills by £300?
Thank you for that. I think that was directed at the honourable member in a previous life. Now, we have committed to 100-year first-year allowances and to maintaining that going forward. But I would just say to the honourable member that unless we deliver secure energy generated at home through cheap renewables, there is no energy security to be had in the years ahead.
Helen Morgan.
Question number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government. Oh, am I taking this one with other one? The government is better targeting these reliefs to make them fairer. The latest figures for 2021-22 showed that the top 7% of claims accounted for 40% of the total value of agricultural property relief.
So I think it's grouped.
Yeah, so do I. With permission, Mr. Speaker, can I group this with questions 6, 15, 16, 21 and 23?
For Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor will know that one of the biggest factors holding back the rural economy is poor public transport. And in fact, the Job Centre in Oswestry, when I visited last year, told me that one of the biggest impediments to people finding a job is that they can't get away from where they live because of poor public transport. So I wonder if the Chancellor could update me as to the discussions she's had with her colleagues in the Department for Transport over reinstating projects such as the Oswestry to Gaborone railway line and step-free access at Whitchurch railway station.
I thank the honourable lady for that question. At the budget, we introduced sustainable transport settlements with £650 million of funding for local transport and confirmed an extension of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, providing £900 million to local authorities to invest in local growth. We also announced money in the budget for some trail finder projects to help those furthest from the labour market back into work. But on the specific issues around transport in her constituency, I'm very happy to set up a meeting with the relevant minister.
Dr. Alderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A5500 growth corridor, a significant transport corridor in my constituency of Stoke-on-Trent South, enjoys an extraordinary concentration of advanced manufacturing with anchor companies including JCB and Michelin. With modest targeted investment in transport, energy and digital infrastructure, this vital corridor could generate 12 billion GVA and create 18,000 jobs. Will the Chancellor meet with me to discuss the targeted investment needed to develop a detailed growth plan for this vital industrial artery and help deliver on this government's mission for growth?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I thank her for the work that she's put into this proposal and for the commitment to delivering growth in her constituency in Stoke. I had the opportunity on a recent visit to meet JCB in the region and see the important work that they're doing, particularly on the use of hydrogen. I would encourage the honourable member, and I'm happy to set this up, to meet the Minister for Services, Small Businesses and Exports, whose portfolio includes local growth. But the government is committed to driving growth in the Midlands, which is why I confirmed funding for the West Midlands Investment Zone at the autumn budget and confirmed an extension of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund.
David Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the recent investment of an extra £20 million into our buses and an extra £11 million to fix our broken roads across Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. Does the Chancellor agree with me that continuing to invest in our roads and our public transport is an excellent way to keep our communities connected and to increase job opportunities and to boost our local economy?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it's great to see two such strong advocates for Stoke in the chamber today. A number a number of local authorities and indeed Labour mayors have raised with me issues around bus procurement and also the importance of buses for the local economy. And I look forward to working with them, particularly David Scaife in York and North Yorkshire and Steve Rotherham in Liverpool, to boost bus services in communities and particularly rural communities to support jobs in the UK. At the budget, I allocated more than £1 billion for local bus services, and that includes £712 million for local authorities to support and improve bus services in the next financial year.
Jonathan Davis.
Number 16. Sorry? Okay, apologies. Museums provide an important contribution to our cultural life, but also our economy. But the Arts Council and the Museums Association found that net expenditure on museums and galleries has decreased by almost 40% in real terms since 2009. I welcome the Chancellor's recognition that the creative industries are key to delivering growth and that national museums were given support in the recent budget. But what steps can the government take to support regional civic museums like Derby Museum, which didn't benefit from this funding?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and the Culture Secretary was really pleased that the creative industries are included in one of the sectors for our industrial strategy and hosted an event with the members of the Creative Industries Task Force in Newcastle just last week to emphasise the importance of having good cultural offers and arts and museums in local communities. I'm very happy to sort out a meeting for my honourable friend with the relevant minister to discuss the issues around mid-Derbyshire and access to the arts and culture.
Emma Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, South Shields is a gorgeous coastal tourist town. We pride ourselves on our small businesses and our strong hospitality industry. But she will also know that they are struggling after years of neglect from the benches opposite. In order to help them, though, can she please outline what consideration she has given to reducing VAT on our hospitality, leisure and tourism?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I remember a very nice dinner of fish and chips in her constituency with her just a few years ago, and she's a strong advocate for local businesses in South Shields. In the budget, we were able to extend business rates relief for the retail, hospitality and leisure sector of 40% next financial year, and then move it onto a fairer footing so that high street businesses and smaller businesses pay fairer rates of business tax compared, for example, with the online giants.
Alison Newham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The bus manufacturer Alexandra Dennis builds innovative electric buses employing 800 people in Scarborough. The Chancellor has spoken about the need for public procurement to take better account of employment and environmental standards. As bus services are brought back into the control of mayors and local authorities, will the government use public procurement to back British companies like Alexandra Dennis to boost economic growth?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know that my honourable friend is a good advocate for businesses, including Alexander Dennis in Scarborough. The government will soon be publishing a new national procurement policy statement which sets out this government's priorities for public procurement in support of our mission to grow the economy. And in addition to the answer that I gave to my honourable friend from Stoke earlier, we recognise the importance of buses to grow our economy, to get people to work, but also the opportunities to use public procurement to buy more buses made in this country, supporting good jobs here in Britain.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Former chair, Mr Speaker, but thank you very much for calling me. I think it's very clear that we all want to see economic growth in rural areas and across the UK. I am just concerned that some of the measures in the Chancellor's budgets are having the opposite effect. I would like to ask the Chancellor which statistic worries her most. Is it the fact that we are at a 20-year high in terms of business closures, or is it that there's been a 100% increase in millionaires leaving the UK?
Well, I've already outlined in some of the positive numbers, the upgrades in the IMF forecast, the PwC report, the fact that the economy returned to growth in the most recent data, and that inflation is falling. So instead of talking our country down, I will be banging the drum to bring investment and jobs to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new hospital in Eastbourne would help to drive economic growth in my town and across rural Sussex. But years of Tory tumbleweed, and I'm afraid the announcement yesterday, mean that we won't see that delivered and built until 2041. So will the Chancellor accelerate the release of funds to the Department of Health to bring forward the building of our new hospital to support patients in Eastbourne and beyond, and of course economic growth more widely?
I thank my honourable friend, the honourable gentleman, for that question, and that I recognise the strength of the feeling about the importance of this issue. We were left a terrible situation by the previous government, the £22 billion black hole in the public finances, and promises to things that had absolutely no money put aside for. We've now done the responsible thing, reviewed the programmes that we inherited from the last government. It does mean that for some projects the timetable has to be pushed back, but that is because the previous government made promises knowing that the cheque would bounce.
Thank you, Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses across the country and in my constituency are still reeling from the Chancellor's damaging budget.
Yep.
She made a commitment at the CBI conference that she wouldn't be coming back for more taxes. Does she stand by that commitment?
I had to do a once-in-a-generation budget in October to fix the mess in the public finances left by the previous government, and I will never have to do a budget like that again because we have now fixed the terrible inheritance that we inherited.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, devastating changes in inheritance tax, increased environmental costs because of the net zero policies, and diversion of farming income or farming support to foreign countries. How does the Chancellor expect, with those kind of policies, she's ever going to generate economic growth in rural areas?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. Bringing stability back to our economy by fixing the public finances, the number one thing that we can do to help businesses to grow, alongside our planning reforms to make it easier to build things in Britain, and our reforms to the pension system to help businesses access long-term patient capital. And as for agricultural property relief, the latest figures showed that the top 7%, or 117 claims, accounted for 40% of the total value of agricultural property relief, costing the taxpayer £219 million. We can't afford to carry on like that, which is why we made the progressive and fair reforms that we did in the budget.
Shadow Minister James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Farming's vital role in growing our rural economy, growing our food and protecting the countryside is threatened by Labour's family farm tax. And the self-proclaimed Iron Chancellor is proving herself to be the tin-eared Chancellor, ignoring the evidence from the NFU and others showing that this tax is based on flawed assumptions. So ahead of Saturday's Farming Day of Unity, rather than threatening the family farms, will she actually speak to farmers, think again and withdraw these damaging proposals?
The problem with the party opposite is that they support increases in spending in vital areas, but they haven't supported any of the tax increases that are necessary to pay for them, which frankly is why we are in the situation we are in today, that we inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Now, in the budget, the honourable gentleman will know that we announced £5 billion for the farming budget over 2 years, including the largest funding directed at sustainable food production and nature recovery in our country's history, and £60 million to support farmers because of flooding.
Antonia Pants.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism will be introduced in 2027, ensuring that imports face a comparable carbon price to those domestic products, giving UK industry confidence to invest without their decarbonisation efforts being undermined. UK steel producers will continue to benefit from high levels of free allowances in the UK ETS until at least the end of 2026, which protects them against carbon leakage via high-emission imports.
Antonia Bant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UB Foundries and Alucast in my constituency of Tipton, Wednesbury and Coseley have raised with me the impact of the UK CBAM coming into effect later and differing from the EU CBAM. This could threaten domestic steel production and make the export of metal products to the EU more difficult. Please can the Minister support the UK steel and metal finishing industries, reassure me that the UK CBAM will not be weaker than the EU CBAM, and will he meet me and other steel MPs to discuss this?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising those points. And as I've set out, the UK CBAM will mitigate the risk of carbon leakage by placing a carbon price on some of the most emissions-intensive industrial goods imported into the UK, including from the iron and steel sector. Now, the UK CBAM is designed for the UK context, and in some areas, its emission scope is wider than that of the EU CBAM, for instance, in respect of indirect emissions. Earlier this week, the first CBAM industry working group was held, and I understand a representative of the UK steel sector attended. I'll make sure my officials continue to engage with the industry sectors most affected, and I'm very happy to discuss further with the honourable member.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heavy industry, whether it is steel, whether it is ceramics, whether it is so many different areas, is totally dependent on low energy costs. And what we're seeing is the trajectory of energy costs, especially industry, rising, whether it is through regulation or whether it is through world markets. Many other countries are doing more to protect our heavy industries by making sure that they can have low input costs in terms of energy. What more can the Minister do to protect our heavy industry in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the number one thing for industry and for households is to bring down the cost of energy, and that's exactly why we're making sure we're investing in renewable energy for the future, homegrown energy, to make sure we have energy independence and energy security, and crucially, lower bills for both households and businesses.
Ledley Thomas.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to tackling money laundering. Money laundering through cash-based high street businesses is a known issue, and the Treasury works closely with law enforcement agencies to monitor trends in criminality and ensure resources are deployed towards the most significant threats.
Ledley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hard-working shopkeepers and entrepreneurs across the country, including in Bromsgrove and the villages, play by the rules and pay their taxes. What is the estimated loss of revenue to the Exchequer from money laundering in retail environments in towns and villages across the country, and what is the government doing to crack down on this?
It is right that we take a robust approach to money laundering, and we have a tailored approach to cash deposit limits to reflect the differences in needs and risk profile across their customer base. I'm committed to working with the FCA and others to ensure we strike the right balance by allowing businesses to continue their operations, but ensuring also that we assess the risks of those who might be using their businesses to launder money.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What additional support can the government offer to support Customs and Excise, local authorities and police forces in gathering supporting evidence that can then be provided to HMRC? Because high street money launderers are brazen fronts for significant criminal enterprises.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We take this issue very, very seriously. The Treasury owns the money laundering regulations, but the FCA, as a major supervisor, has a very key role, and we work very, very closely with the criminal enforcement agencies, who are independent, of course, but we're absolutely committed to clamping down on money laundering.
Richard Baker.
Number 10, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would like to answer this question with question number 20. This government recognises the contributions that miners made to prosperity of the nation and the challenging circumstances in which they worked. That is why the government agreed to transfer the Investment Reserve Fund to members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, so that the mine workers who powered our country receive a fairer pension.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree ending the injustice of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme is not only great news for the 849 former mine workers in my constituency or benefit, but also for the economies of the local communities where they live, which were left behind by the previous government? And will he and his colleagues' government continue to engage with the trustees of the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme to ensure that in the same way the funds built up in that scheme are used for the benefit of its members?
I thank my honourable friend for his question and his work on behalf of his constituents. He may know that in the previous Parliament, I, with colleagues, worked on the Mine Workers Pension Scheme through the Business Select Committee to lay the ground for the initiatives that this government were able to then implement quickly coming into government. Unfortunately, that work had not yet been done for the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, which is why ministers are meeting with the scheme trustees to consider the options.
Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, this is an important issue for South Wales families. My uncle Jackie was a deputy at Cwm Marine Pit. My uncle Georgie, a deputy at Oakdale. Sadly, they've now passed, but they were members of the British Coal Pension Scheme. Now, many of their mining friends will be in their 80s and 90s now. Their pensions deserve uplifting. So will the Minister please commit to making good progress here? Time is running out for the men and women who fired our industrial past.
Hear, hear. I thank my honourable friend for raising the question on an issue that I know is deeply important to him, his constituents and his family, and on an issue that he's worked on for many, many years. The government is actively considering proposals from the scheme's trustees, and we will set out next steps in due course. And my colleague in the Department for Business, the Minister for Trade, will be working on the detail, and I will be meeting with her shortly to consider those options.
Mundell.
Mr Speaker, I have significant former mining areas in my constituency in the Douglas Valley and in Upper Nithsdale. And constituents there are concerned about the British coal scheme because many people in that scheme did actually work underground before being promoted into other jobs. So can he ensure that to ensure fairness in the implementation of this government policy, that the timescale in which they are compensated is the same as others in the other scheme?
I thank the honourable member for his question. I think fairness is the right word. That's why we worked in opposition to try to persuade the last government to act on the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, but we failed because the last government didn't think this was an urgent issue for them to consider. We've implemented that at the first budget of this Labour government. That's fairness in action. We'll continue to work with trustees on the BCSSS and come back with further options in due course.
That well-known mining area. Let's go to Jim Shannon's. Thank you.
Mr Speaker, I spoke to the Minister beforehand, so he knows where I'm coming from in my question. Those who have passed away and whose families have, I understand, retired to Northern Ireland and who deserve their pensions. With that being the case, has the Minister had an opportunity to ascertain the numbers of those in Northern Ireland who will qualify for the pensions, and will the honourable gentleman chase up those people to ensure that they get the monies that they deserve? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I'm afraid I've not had time since he told me 35 minutes ago that he was going to ask that question, but I've heard it clearly. I will take it away and I'll come back to him in due course.
Question 11, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer this with questions 12 and 22. Mr Speaker, the Government announced a range of measures at the autumn budget to support SMEs, including those in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. These include more than doubling the employment allowance, freezing small business rates multiplier, extending RHL relief of 40%, maintaining the small profits rate, and reducing duty on qualifying draft products, which represent 60% of alcoholic drinks sold in pubs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Labour manifesto committed to replacing the business rate system. However, last week on the Treasury Committee, the Minister seemed to rule out the kind of comprehensive reform that the Liberal Democrats and others have been campaigning for, and indicated it might possibly only be a tinkering around the edges of rates and reliefs. So can the Government confirm today whether they still intend to replace the business rate system, or will it just be tinkering around the edges of this broken system?
Mr Speaker, I think that retail, hospitality and leisure businesses that make up the backbone of our high street might object to the idea of permanently lower tax rates as being tinkering around the edges. That's a fundamental change which we want to bring in from April 2026 to make sure they have the stability, certainty and permanently lower tax rates, alongside, of course, our wider ambitions in the Transforming Business Rates discussion paper, which at last week's Treasury Select Committee I invited the honourable gentleman to read and respond to.
Michael Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I draw members' attention to my declaration in the Register of Interests. Retail is an important part of the economy in my constituency of Worsley and Eccles, including many wonderful independent businesses. Will, who runs the excellent Wandering Pallet in Monton, wrote to me about the challenges he's facing. Can I ask the Minister to outline the measures that this government is taking to support small business owners like Will in my constituency and across the country, enabling our high streets to thrive?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, for referencing Wandering Pallet, the business in his constituency. And without knowing the details of the rateable value of that particular property, I might point the owner in the direction of the fact that we are retaining small business rates relief, the fact that we are freezing the small business multiplier next year, and of course that we are extending retail, hospitality and leisure relief in 25-26. I would also point the owner of that business and indeed other businesses to our future plans, as I mentioned, to have permanently lower tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses with rateable values below £500,000, as well as looking at reforms to small business rates relief to better support businesses who want to expand into a second premises.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could advise the Chamber what consideration they have given to exempting the seasonal tourist industry from the national insurance hikes this summer that are set to kick in. This would particularly benefit Paynton Zoo and Splashdown in the Torbay constituency.
I thank the honourable member for his question, but as he will know, we set out the details of our decision to increase the rate of national insurance contributions from employers and to reduce the threshold, and we've added as well the different benefit that we will give particularly to small businesses and charities by more than doubling the employment allowance. The employers' national insurance contributions changes were amongst the toughest that we took in the budget, but they were necessary to repair the public finances and deliver the economic stability which is so crucial for investment and growth.
We've had the former, let's have the present Chair of the Finance Committee, Dame McKinley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend rightly said that SMEs are a very vital part of our high streets and our economy. And one of the big changes, of course, is the change to business rates. And he wasn't going to be tempted in the Select Committee last week to give more detail on the time frame. But many businesses are really wanting that certainty about business rates as they go forward. So could I tempt him just to give an indication of the government's thinking about how quickly this might be introduced and whether the small business rate relief is likely to survive or be subsumed into a new regime?
Well, I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for her questions, and if she didn't succeed in tempting me at the Select Committee, I doubt she's going to succeed today. But I can reassure her that the decisions we've set out about introducing the permanently lower rates of business rates for RHL properties below £500,000 rateable value will be coming in from April 2026. And specifically in relation to small business rates relief, I can confirm the Government is committed to retaining that. And in fact, one of the options we're looking at in our Transforming Business Rates discussion paper is about how to support businesses who want to expand into a second premises, thereby growing the business, because at the moment there's a cliff edge in them losing the small business rates relief.
We come to Shadow Minister Richard Fuller.
Confidence on Britain's high streets is sliding faster than the Chancellor will be down the ski slopes of Davos later today. So, with retail sales down rather than up as expected in the run-up to Christmas, and with the British Retail Consortium saying 2/3 of stores will raise prices to cover her national insurance increases, when will the Minister accept that the Chancellor's strategy of raising taxes and increasing regulations is an economic strategy that is not working?
Well, I'm glad to know the Shadow Minister's morning was well spent cooking up that Davos line about the ski slopes. Look, what he will know, and what sectors across the economy will know, is that having a stable economy is a prerequisite for the investment we need to get the economy growing. And that is why we had to take difficult decisions at the autumn budget, including those to increase the rate of employers' national insurance contributions. Alongside that increase, however, we more than doubled the employment allowance, and we set out our plans to have permanently lower tax rates for high street RHL properties from April 2026.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A number of small high street businesses are going to be hit hard by the government's jobs tax and the dramatic reduction in business rates relief. And House of Commons Library research, which I've commissioned, shows that from April 2026, the government's reforms to business rates could leave small and independent businesses effectively subsidising the big chains. So will the Chancellor meet with me and a delegation of small and independent businesses from St Albans so we can make the case for fairer reforms and for wholesale reform of the broken business rate system?
Mr. Speaker, one of the problems with the Liberal Democrats is that they support all of our spending plans, but they don't support any of the tax changes to fund them. And this is a prime example of this. When we're talking about increasing employer national insurance contributions, we acknowledge that was one of the toughest decisions we took at the budget, but it was necessary to fix the public finances and provide support for those public services, which I note they're very keen to support themselves.
Frank McNally.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I became Chancellor, there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. We simply couldn't carry on like that, which is why I have taken control of our public finances and made growth the #1 priority of this government to improve living standards. In December, I launched the second phase of our spending review, where for the first time in 17 years, every single pound of taxpayer money will be investigated line by line to ensure that it is being spent well. The spending review will set resource or day-to-day departmental budgets until 2028-29 and capital departmental budgets until 2029-2030. On the 11th of June, when we conclude the review, I will present departmental budgets to the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The recent drop in the rate of inflation is welcome news for those facing financial pressures across Coatbridge and Bellshill, as is the expectation that the UK will become the fastest growing economy in Europe. What further action is my right honourable friend taking, working in partnership with Cabinet colleagues, to ensure that working families continue to see prices fall and living standards rise?
Thank my honourable friend for that question, and I know that the cost of living has a deep impact on all of our constituents, including in Coatbridge and Bellshill. Like the honourable member, my honourable friend, I was pleased to see the reduction in inflation last week, and the Bank of England's independence is sacrosanct to carry on those efforts. In addition, we increased the minimum wage in the budget, we've reformed universal credit to reduce deductions and extended the household support fund, all to help ensure working families have more money in their pockets.
Is that the Chancellor Millstride?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Lady spoke a moment ago about the importance of spending money wisely. So could I ask her, in light of the Treasury Select Committee's conclusion that her new Office for Value for Money is a waste of money, would she agree that one of its early actions should be to abolish itself in order to save money?
I was pleased to appoint Tom Hayhoe to run the Office for Value for Money, somebody who's got a track record of delivering value for money for taxpayers. What this government wants to scrap is giving contracts to friends and donors, because that was a colossal waste of money instigated by the party opposite.
Millstride.
The Chancellor's answer was an answer, but I don't think it actually connected in any way with my question. So could I perhaps now ask her about national insurance hikes? Mr. Speaker, a full 2/3 of the revenues raised through Labour's job tax is simply going on servicing the additional debt being run up by this profligate government. Given this, does the Chancellor really believe that the catastrophic effects of this tax on businesses right up and down this country is a price worth paying?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, and we set out the detail of that at the time of the budget. It was absolutely essential to close that gap, to bring stability back to the public finances. That required difficult decisions, but they were the right decisions to ensure that our country has the stability that it lacked for so many years under so many different Prime Ministers and Chancellors under the party opposite.
Steve Yam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency in Mansfield has more members of British Coal staff superannuation scheme than any other constituency in the country. Can the Chief Secretary therefore outline the process and the questions that need to be satisfied in order to release the Investment Reserve Fund to the surviving beneficiaries of the scheme?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, which is clearly of importance to him and his constituents. As I've confirmed to the House today, the Minister for Trade in the Department for Business and Trade is working with the trustees of the BECSS scheme to consider options. I will meet with the Minister in due course to look at those and provide further updates to the House in due course.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Local Government Association estimates that the budget's increases to employer national insurance contributions will cost local councils an extra £637 million per year. The government's funding settlement for them in relation to that of £515 million will leave them with a gap, putting key services like social care, pothole repairs and leisure facilities at risk. Yep. Will the Chancellor commit to fully funding that gap for local councils rather than them having to look for savings themselves?
Yeah. Mr Speaker, during the passage of the bill increasing the rates of employer national insurance, we set out very clearly how the scheme would work in terms of reimbursing public departments or local government for their costs. In fact, it's a measure in line very much with how the previous government attempted to do at the health and social care levy, where third-party contractors, private contractors are engaged, and those costs will be considered by local government or other public sector organisations in the round.
Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The previous Conservative government decided to back an INEOS project in Antwerp with a £600 million loan guarantee. I have spoken with the current Secretary of State and Government Minister about this, and I've been told that the government has no plans to stop this money, even though INEOS plan to close the Grangeworth refinery and thousands of jobs will be lost. Why is there £600 million for Antwerp and not Grangemouth? And why would the government allow this to happen and not use the £600 million as leverage with INEOS in order to avoid Scottish job losses?
This government can't account for the decisions made by the party opposite, but we have created an Office of Value for Money to make sure that we always get value for money when we use taxpayers' money.
Right, Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Speaking as someone actively involved in a number of businesses, unlike the majority of the front bench, I've spent far too much of my life trying to communicate with HMRC. I am not alone. Taxpayers cumulatively spent 798 years on hold with HMRC in 2022-3, with letters often going unanswered for months. When the phone is picked up, decent British taxpayers and their advisers are increasingly being treated like criminals by arrogant, petty, unaccountable bureaucrats. Will the Chancellor today commit to a comprehensive review of HMRC to make them as accountable to the taxpayer as the taxpayer is to them, starting with answering the first...
Mr Lowell, please. It's topicals. They're meant to be short and punchy, and I'm sure you're very good at that normally. Right. Who's answering, Minister?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of my key priorities as Exchequer Secretary and the Minister with responsibility for HMRC is to oversee a programme of transformation of HMRC to improve its customer service, to digitise the service, to close the tax gap and to make sure we have the modern reformed service we need for the future.
Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I draw members' attention to my declaration in the Register of all party parliamentary groups. 3.8 million self-employed UK taxpayers were shamefully excluded from government financial support during COVID-19 pandemic, with many, including pregnant women and war veterans, forgotten about by the party opposite. Will the Minister meet with me to discuss how we can address the unfairness faced by so many during the pandemic?
Well, thank my honourable friend for his question. And as he set out, decisions on the eligibility for COVID-19 financial support were taken by the previous government. The current government currently has no plans to assess or pursue a financial compensation scheme. But I note the COVID-19 inquiry has recently launched its module investigating the economic response to the pandemic, and the government is committed to learning from the inquiry's findings.
Redwood, Lee.
When I visited St Barnabas Hospice in Lincoln recently, the Chief Executive told me he was having to pay £350,000 every year now extra to cover the national insurance increase. I don't expect an answer now, but as we all agree that palliative care is so important and we want to encourage it, and the committee bill started today, will the government keep this increase under review in terms of hospices?
I thank the honourable member for his question. The Health Secretary set out the settlement for hospices just before Christmas to ensure that hospices have got the money that they need, including to compensate for the increase in national insurance. But I'm very happy to arrange a meeting for the honourable member with the relevant minister in the Department for Health.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On New Year's Day, hundreds of my constituents woke up not to hangovers and warm homes, but to floodwater rushing into their houses. I watched as families and young children were pulled from their homes in Plattbridge, alongside flooding in Ashton and Bickershaw. I welcome the government's £2.4 billion committed to flood defence schemes, But can I ask the Minister if he will commit to protecting funding for flood victims and flood defence schemes in the future?
Minister, welcome to the debate.
My honourable friend is a powerful advocate for his constituents, and particularly for those that have suffered in recent weeks, including others actually across Greater Manchester. As I said earlier, the Government has put in £2.4 billion to ensure flood resilience over the next 2 years. As he'll be well aware, future decisions on flood funding will be taken in the spending review in the normal way, but I know he'll continue to be a powerful advocate for his constituents.
Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, schools in Westmoreland have been told that they will have to meet, at least in part, the cost of teacher pay rises next year from within existing funds and by making efficiencies. Doesn't the Chancellor understand that all that's available to schools in my constituency is to sack teachers and to merge classes? Will she instead then commit to fully fund the teachers' pay rise and other cost increases so our schools can do the job they are meant to do?
Yeah.
The honourable member knows that it's important that in order to restore public finances and put them on a firm foundation, departmental settlements have to reflect the cost of the civil servants that they employ. That's how the departments are working, but as the Chancellor has previously confirmed, the Department for Education has received money in order to cover the cost of running the education system, and those details will be provided to schools in the normal way in due course.
Jill Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State for Transport, the Secretary of State for Wales, the Chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee and Welsh Government all went on record last week recognising the low level of spending on rail infrastructure in Wales by the previous government. Does my right honourable friend agree with them and with me that this government must put this underinvestment right and ensure me that the Treasury recognises the crucial part our railways play in economic growth in Wales?
I thank my honourable friend, who's an important champion for the voice of the Welsh economy. Wales can and will play an important part in our growth mission. Our two Labour governments continue to work together as we review the position inherited from the previous government, including on rail infrastructure, and decisions will be set out at the spending review in June.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Chancellor advise businesses in my constituency who are having to make staff unemployed to pay for the employment and national insurance increases, and also having to stop expansion plans because of her rises?
Mr. Speaker, as we've been clear throughout the budget and the period since then, the decision to raise employer national insurance contributions was one of the toughest decisions we've taken as government, and we recognise it has consequences for businesses. What we think all businesses will benefit from in future is the economic stability which it brings, which will drive investment and growth across the country.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating Intersight, a technology business in Stockton that's celebrating its 10th anniversary with 40% growth? And does she agree with me that our industrial strategy will help businesses to invest and grow in Teesside?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I join him in congratulating Intersight on their 10th anniversary as a business and the rapid growth that they are enjoying. The announcement that we were able to make as a government last year about the carbon capture and storage work in Teesside will be a big driver of jobs and growth in that part of the country, and I look forward to him working with him and local businesses in Stockton in making that a reality.
Oliver Dowden.
Does the Chancellor of the Exchequer propose to fund the reported £9 billion bill for the continued use of Diego Garcia to the Mauritians through higher taxes, through more borrowing, or through spending cuts?
Chancellor.
We are in discussions with the new administration in the United States around the future of Diego Garcia, and we'll set out details in the spending review, as you would expect.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's estimated that 148,000 people had their lives cut short between 2010 and 2020 as a result of austerity measures. And then on top of this, this poor health led to over £13 billion in lost productivity under the previous government. What are my right honourable friends' estimates of the different choices and the impact that they will have on the health of the nation, but also on economic growth?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I know that she closely studies work of Professor Michael Marmot on life expectancy and the impact of health inequalities on our country. At the budget, we increased the minimum wage, and in addition, we extended the Household Support Fund, reduced the amount that could be taken deductions from universal credit, all to try and put more money in the pockets of ordinary working people to reduce some of those inequalities and tackle the cost of living crisis.
Mr. Speaker, one of my GP surgeries called me this morning to highlight the impact of the national insurance contribution rises on them. It's going to cost them £40,000. Their only response is they're going to have to freeze pay, cost of living pay increases for all their support staff. So does she finally accept that working people up and down the country are paying the prices for her tax rises?
Mr. Speaker, what we accept is that the difficult decisions we took at the budget enabled extra funding to be put into the NHS as a result of those difficult decisions having been taken. The GP surgeries have had a funding settlement which considers all the pressures on them in the round.
Sonia Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Dudley has a proud industrial heritage, with manufacturing still worth £1 billion a year to the local economy from sectors that account for nearly 10% of the UK's total economic output. What steps has the government taken to promote the growth of the manufacturing sector and ensure that towns like Dudley continue to build on their industrial heritages?
I thank my honourable friend for that question and the work that she does to support and promote businesses in Dudley. Our modern industrial strategy and the targeting of 8 sectors where there's huge potential for growth will ensure that we work with businesses right across the country to do things like reform the planning system to make it easier for them to build, and reform the pension system to get funding for businesses looking to grow and expand, including businesses in Dudley.
Dave Dugan.
Mr. Speaker, neither the Federal Reserve nor the EU Central Bank are engaged in active quantitative tightening, but the Bank of England is. And the Bank of England is costing the public finances in the region of £13 billion a year by a fire sale of UK government bonds. Last time I spoke to the Chancellor about this, she said that's because of the Bank of England's operational independence, which we all value, but it's not a licence for impunity. So what discussions will she have with the Bank of England about releasing UK government debt in a way that benefits everybody in the UK?
It's our view that it's absolutely right that the Bank of England has operational independence. This is in line with international standards and indeed in jurisdictions around the world, including the United States and the Eurozone.
Colin Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent developments in the UK investment trust sector has once again shone a light about the crucial role that retail investors play in our financial markets. In her Mansion House speech last November, the Chancellor rightly prioritised leveraging domestic pension capital to drive the government's economic growth mission. But does the Minister agree with me that greater retail participation in UK financial markets also supports growth and democratises wealth? And will she meet with me to discuss how government can better support access to financial markets for individuals, including in my Buckingham Bletchley constituency?
Always happy to meet with my honourable friend who is a near neighbour. We absolutely agree that retail investment is crucial, and I want to see more progress on the advice, guidance, boundary and targeted support, and I will be working closely in my new role with the FCA to take that forward.
Final question, Sarah Olney.
Mr. Speaker, residents in my constituency of Richmond Park will have been extremely concerned to read the news this morning that the Chancellor plans to announce next week the expansion of Heathrow. I'd like to invite her to tell us yes or no on the floor of the House this morning whether or not the government backs expansion at Heathrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to comment on leaks. But what I would say is this government are absolutely committed to growing our economy and making this a great place for businesses to invest and trade in.
Right, that completes questions. We'll let the front bench change over.